Hey all. So, it's been a while since I've done an update to this series on the Essential Champions for offense, and a large part of that is because last season with Unstoppable Armor, it was a brand new tactic, and there was a lot to learn. Like, we tested it quite a bit in off season, but it's no accident that our first few wars of the season had by far our highest death counts. And it wasn't just us. Our wars against SAS and for Loki, both sides were clearly experimenting with things and learning quite a bit, often the hard way. So I didn't really feel qualified to make this a month ago, but after that season, I think I've really picked up quite a bit. I have a good understanding of the tactic. There may be plenty in here to disagree with me on, but I think between that, new champions, new buffs, and the new Defiance tactic that we have going forward, there are some things to talk about here. First off, let's just start with the tech class, work our way across. So, I have moved Nimrod and Nebula up firmly into must have. There's so much more involving shock on the map. There are so many more relevant robots in the defensive pool right now. I think already Path 9 had been updated so that Nebula looked quite good there. Nimrod with Odin pre-fights, or even without them and just playing carefully, works quite well on both parts of Path 9. Like, both of these champions are monsters for dealing with the nodes, and then just so much damage. Nimrod destroys mutants. I've been talking more and more about how I think his signature ability has actually been underrated. I've seen multiple people saying, well, yeah, he has great prestige, so feed him if you can, but he's so good he just doesn't need it. No, he's so good it's worth taking him up unduped. That doesn't mean it's not a huge deal. Like, this guy at high sig just destroys so many difficult fights. Cannot say enough. And then Ghost is often banned, and I think that Warlock is increasingly a niche champion. More and more people are placing without willpower, so you can't just throw him everywhere. You need double immunities, which is kind of what you once could do. And Guardian is not all over the place either, but I think both Warlock and Guardian are powerful enough in their best matchups, which are themselves common enough that I feel comfortable putting them here with the others. And of course, when Ghost is unbanned, you always find yourself going, was it worth it for them to ban somebody else? Because there's still so much on the map that she does trivialize. So, looking at our nice to haves, I thought about moving Dr. Octopus down because he just doesn't seem to be doing that much on the power control side. I do know people who use him, but even with one ranked in my battle group for a full 2 seasons now, I just haven't been assigning him. And while he can do cool things, I feel like the comfort level needed to do that with him in a way that makes him better than someone else maybe makes this a little bit of a stretch, but the fact that he has both that and healing control, and Path 1 has just recently been reworked so that having an explicit heal block is more important, I feel those together mean that leaving him here is probably a good call. We'll see how that evolves. I'll try and pay more attention to people outside of my alliance using him, but I think for now I'm going to leave him here. Silver Centurion, I still maintain that he is a very good champion. He has excellent immunities. He can also work in Path 9. He can do great damage without worrying about purification. I am assuming he's duped for this. There are some nodes that really mess with his rotations. We're finding that more and more. But I think, especially right now with Unstoppable Armor still up, the fact that he has that slow is just that good. Like, his slow is not quite as reliable or long-lasting as some of the others, but when you combine that slow with his immunities, with his damage potential, with his active armor up, I think he makes sense here. You often end up sending him with the House of X pre-fight in my experience, but just still a very powerful champion who will make some pathing easier, and that is the point of my tier 2 here. So skipping over, I think these next four are still good. They will make pathing easier, but it's rarer. Actually, I should touch on Mysterio real quick. I still think he makes sense here, especially because the Penny Parker synergy exists now and can dramatically boost his damage. But he's not as valuable for somebody like Domino as he once was, because we have Nimrod in Tier 1, and this next champion, Omega Sentinel, in Tier 2. It's possible she moves up. She has a miss counter, which is going to be very important next season, is already fairly important. She has a reliable heal block, and I talked about how Path 1 was reworked to make that important. She's Nullify immune. She interacts with Bleed and Poison in a very unique way. She has that auto block. She can have very high energy resistance. She very well may move up, but I think we haven't seen a ton of places where I'm like, oh man, I just want to assign an Omega Sentinel to all of this. It's more like, oh, an Omega Sentinel would actually work right here. Okay, so that kind of works, which is more what Tier 2 is for me. Again, this is all coming from a who do I think you should rank for war offense, and who do I want to have available as a planner. So on that note, moving on to Penny Parker, she is honestly somewhat niche. But I've been assigning a lot of her because of two specific abilities. Her combination of true immunities has been very helpful on Path 9. She's been our go-to counter for Void on that first node that gets the massive Fury. Her very high combo count just makes that fight so much easier to manage. It's still hard, it's still a big Void, but she's just been a godsend for us there. We've been using her on some of the Weapon X placements on the map, but then she also works really well to counter kinetic transference or other similar nodes. We've sent her against Nick Fury on the second node on 7B, a few other placements like that, because as long as she has that sync shield up, she power locks when she's blocking. And that's actually a very powerful ability, and it can let her do a lot of things that aren't immediately obvious, especially when combined with the last point, which is that she is way underrated as a nuke. There are very, very few champions or nodes on the map where she does not have the damage to take them out in gaining 3 bars of power, and she can gain power on parries. Now, they have to be vulnerable to Incinerate. They can't have very high energy resistance. But as long as that's true, you throw one special 1 to get her to 10 charges, you build up to a special 2, throw it with 11, most things are dead right away or soon after. She is extremely helpful to have available. I think we're actually going to have a rank 4 pretty soon, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So then to move on to the honorable mentions, Howard still has uses. He can counter prowess with a synergy. He's a solid counter against mutants. He has armor and extra ability accuracy, which kind of can make him a poor man's Nimrod or Omega Sentinel. And then Vision still has, solid power control and immunities. I am moving Guillotine 2099 down, though, because while she is still a good champion, if I want somebody who doesn't crit, I find myself often preferring Silver Centurion or Guardian. And if I want somebody who can ramp up to really high damage, again, I usually reach for somebody else. If I want somebody with reliable power control, we have a lot of options for that now. If I want somebody with double immunity, she's almost never the first one I think of. So she still has real use. You will see her assigned in Tier 1, and that's not a mistake on the part of the planners. But for myself, I am moving her down because given the need to ramp her up, for her to really be an amazing option as opposed to a serviceable option, I just think that she is a little bit outside of the top tiers these days. And then Captain Sam, I think that he has a ton of potential. I'm really interested to see what he does, but he's very much here because I consider him unproven. We don't have one to assign in my BG, or we would have been testing him in the off-season. I haven't seen much with him. I shall be watching his career with great interest. That's pretty much where that is. Cosmic, there's not a whole lot to talk about. And that's because Hercules is often banned. When he's not, he's still good. But the change in tactics and all of that isn't really doing much to interact with Cosmics. I think the exception there is the rework of Path 8. But the way that people place on Path 8, especially right now with Unstoppable Armor, is very anti Cosmic. Because unless I'm forgetting something, there isn't a Cosmic champion with access to slow. And that means that trying to answer Path 8 directly by just getting a bunch of buffs with a Cosmic champion and benefiting from Rich Get Richer that way is often not worth it. When that's possible, then somebody like Angela or Venompool or Venom or Odin, they all look that much better. But often you're ending up using Angela for, Path 9, where people will also often place counters to her, like Doom. And if you're not doing that, you're probably just sending Odin to give someone else pre-fights. Like maybe you're using a Mystic with Odin pre-fights to take lane 8. Maybe you're giving the Shock pre-fight to somebody else. Odin is still valuable because he can take fights on the war map. I've proven that. I assigned him several times last season when we got top 3. Like, he's still very good. And there's still fights that Hyperion, Medusa, all of these can do. But it just feels like right now in Alliance War, it is not the age of Cosmics, so there's not a lot of movement here. We'll see what changes with that going forward. Now, for Mystic, we do have some big movement. Tigra, Sorcerer Supreme, and Diablo have all moved up to Tier 1. And that is largely because Mystics benefit a ton from Unstoppable Armor. It is extra power for them. Tigra is very good at stopping it completely. She went from sometimes she works, but it's often people showing off kind of option in war, to you don't even have to be that good with Tigra. The fact that she completely shuts off buffs makes her one of the best options in certain spots option. So her stock went up a ton. And then the better you are with her, the more she can take, the more she can shut down. Her ceiling is very, very high, especially when you consider that she is the single best synergy for Kitty Pryde, who, while in my opinion being a very risky champion, can do some very cool things. Sorcerer Supreme has the best access to slow out of any Mystic. She gains power passively, which means you don't have to land hits. That's very important for some of the fights. She has a synergy that gives her a bar of power at the start, which then stacks with advanced power boosts. She's absolutely amazing. Like, I even said when I first made this list that I thought Sorcerer was roughly as good as Claire, but just wasn't as relevant for the map at the time. She is now. And so she is right here in Tier 1 where she's supposed to be. And then Diablo has just been proving his worth. Basically, if the fight is structured in a way that you can use Mystic Dispersion or something else to get to your special 3 before you die, he's probably going to win against an opponent that can be poisoned. He just does so much damage. His energy resistance pre-fight is huge for all kinds of matchups. There are more champions and nodes that do energy damage these days. It even allows him to take less damage from Hazard Shift from the Incinerates that applies. Diablo is very, very good. We've sent out quite a few for difficult fights, and even in season, when it's the first time somebody's taken one, it's worked out more than once. I know For Loki is sending him a ton. You want a Diablo in your battle group if you don't have one. So moving down to Tier 2, I have dropped Magic for the moment, and that is just because she's a 5-star. She is too squishy these days. Power control is important. And it is nice to have good Magic players around because sometimes she's still one of the best options. She still simplifies things. But often there are too many complicating factors for me to feel great about sending just a Magic because she's a 5-star. If she is released as a 6-star, with or without the existence of power back boosts, because I think that may be what's holding her back, is how good she is with them, then she will jump back up. Because a 6-star rank 4 Magic with the Purgatory or Morningstar or Warlock synergies, with half recoil, like running just double edge, you were talking a very hard hitting champion. And Limbo, with that health pool, with that block proficiency, with that ability to be crit less often and for less, a 6-star rank 4 Magic would actually feel pretty survivable in my opinion, because that's what she used to feel like. She feels squishy now, but for those of you who've been playing long enough, 5-star Magic used to feel like one of the safest attackers in the game. She may come back, but I think for now she's solidly in tier 2 because she's just not worth the risk often. Hood, I think, is very much in tier 2, and I'm even considering promoting him at some point. The passive Fate Seal, the staggers, the ability accuracy, all on a champion who can get easy openings with invisibility, power steal, be stun immune, and do a ton of damage for at least a couple fights each war without too much effort. Like, this is a powerful champion. I've seen Hood boss solos of Nimrod, of just a number of the worst unstoppable armor defenders. I've seen him take a lot of mini bosses. Hood is very, very good. And when you combine that with the fact that he satisfies the most important synergy for Kingpin, who is also insane, Hood stock is on the rise. He is solidly here because we still send out a lot of unranked Hoods alongside Kingpins. He's not essential, but literally just this last war, I tagged the player in my BG who has a rank 4 Kingpin, and I said, hey, at some point, I would like you to rank your Hood. Like, we can talk about how to use him best, where we're going to put him, but, like, that's a weapon that you could have that we don't currently have, and I would like to in the future. Sigil Witch is an interesting one, because there are matchups where she just flat out isn't safe. I mean, if you want to tell me that you can always parry every special without fail, and that you can make sure unblockable is always the last buff applied and that there isn't something else she'll nullify instead, cool, but I don't really believe you. Sigil Witch is more a champion where if the fight is simple enough that she can ramp up to a special 3 and stay alive, then kind of like Diablo, that will often be enough. Most of the fights I've seen with Sigil Witch are not terribly pretty, I'm not gonna lie. She does get hit a fair amount. If she's ranked high enough, she has the health to survive it, and then she will finish the fight. Like, I've seen a lot of solos, but I think this is one you want to approach with caution. Mephisto still has some potential, but lord does he need his buff if you don't have his synergies. Yeah, enough said on there. Symbiote Supreme and Man-Thing are still excellent. I'm waiting to see if we see more out of Longshot, and Voodoo especially as he's getting more popular. Longshot I ranked specifically thinking he might be useful for unstoppable armor because of that Fate Seal. I think what's happened is that there are fights that he would be amazing for, but we have other options that are easier to path for those. And then the fights we worry about the most, where that Fate Seal would really matter, getting him to 2 bars can be a bit of an issue. So, Longshot's staying down in tier 3 for me for now, but great champion. So moving on to Science, I haven't really changed anything in the top. It's just the fact that, we're not sending torches as often, even when he's unbanned, because, as I have said for a long time, he has a lot of alternatives. A lot of the fights that people were sending torch to, it was basically just white knuckling it and he finished it on time and then you healed him up, right? that didn't make him the best option. And I think him being banned so consistently allowed people to really understand the strengths of some of these other champions in Tier 1 and 2, especially Reed, Mr. Negative, and Spider Man 2099. And so I don't think we'll ever go back to the golden age of Torch. He's powerful, he always will be, but there will be less of him going forward. I did remove the italics from Mr. Negative and Spider Man 2099, because while they do have real overlap, I think they are distinct enough that we see them assigned in different places, and you just really do want both, in my opinion. So moving on to Tier 2, leaving I-Bomb thing, She-Hulk there, although I do want to point out this new tactic Defiance makes an awful lot of science champions, including especially She-Hulk, in my mind, very, very good. I actually highlighted Captain America Infinity War specifically to talk about that, because he had been a little harder to path, in my opinion, but giving him buff immunity really takes him to another level. We actually used him against Ebony Maw on Node 24 this last war, and it was an incredibly simple fight. Like, he does take some block damage because of Aspect of Evolution and Bubble Shield, but he still ended the fight above 95%. And this wasn't even a max sig cap. This was just a rank 3 relying on the fact that he blocks really well, does really good damage, has glancing, which gives him extra resistances, and is immune to buffs. If you haven't tried Cap Infinity War with Defiance, look for a spot to do it. He's very, very good. And then Overseer is still Overseer. I did go ahead and highlight Abomination here because he also gets the tactic. Red Guardian, I think we're waiting on his buff. And then Spider-Ham still hits like an absolute truck. The more I've been playing with him, especially after taking him into Abyss as a 5-star for my Green Goblin run, the kit works so well. He does so much damage. The AI doesn't need to cooperate perfectly, although he has access to 2 taunts, so it often will cooperate more than it would for somebody else. The AI does not need to cooperate perfectly for him to do an incredible amount of damage and finish fights very quickly. Spider-Ham is worth keeping an eye on. So moving on to skill, I haven't actually moved anybody, but I have highlighted Killmonger, Falcon, and Hawkeye because all 3 of them get the Defiance tactic. And again, as with Captain America, it just shoots their stock way up. Like, Killmonger already had True Strike, Counter Punch, and Indestructible charges. Now he has all of that, and he doesn't trigger Mystic Dispersion or Aspect of Evolution. He can't have anything nullified because he never gained it in the first place. It's just amazing. Same thing with Falcon, his ability to shut down abilities, Hawkeye and his slow and damage over time. I actually didn't even mention in science that Mr. Fantastic has this. You are going to see a lot of Reed this season in my war videos. Not that you didn't before, but you're going to see more. Like, I think that in a vacuum, Mr. Fantastic is actually the stronger champion than Spider-Man 2099, even taking into account the anti-venom synergy, unless you're looking specifically at war. And that's because in war, opponents have Mystic Dispersion. And the thing that makes Miguel better in some war fights, especially with that incredibly powerful anti-venom synergy, is the buff immunity. When you take Reed, who also blunts combat power, who has his very high evade chance, who has his resistances, who blunts opponent specials, and you give him buff immunity, I've only used him a few times with it, but it feels almost like cheating. It's going to be a fun season. But then moving on to Mutant at the end, again, I haven't moved a lot around. I do just want to say, I think Magneto House of X's stock is rising for what's happening on the field in general, but he no longer gets the tactic. Apocalypse no longer gets the tactic, and so the mutant class in general is a little weaker this season because of the loss of Power Down. As I said in honorable mention last time, most mutants, absent like 6 at the bottom, can be used in war and give good results. The class is just that strong. I don't want to go over all of them, but I am going to point out Captain Britain, and that's because, as has been lamented a few times recently, there is a lot of disorient on the map right now. I don't think I'm alone in finding it quite annoying, because Apocalypse is the only champion truly immune to it. And he is large, mutant, and metal, and therefore there are ways to counter him. The only other champions that are close to immune to disorient reliably, both passive and active forms, are Nimrod and Omega Sentinel, who are functionally immune to it against mutants, because both of them cannot have their ability accuracy reduced, and both of them have high enough armor that unless their opponents can crit through block, the lowered block proficiency doesn't hurt them that much. They can still block for days and parry freely. Captain Britain has a bit of that as well. When she gains prowess, her defensive ability accuracy increases, and she gains that Bulwark passive as long as she's awakened, which increases her block proficiency. Taken together, these two effects mean that as she ramps, she becomes basically immune to disorient. And she's not metal. Out of the 3 of them, she's the only one that's not metal. And she also gets this benefit against all champions because she creates her own purification. She doesn't require the opponent to purify, and she doesn't require the opponent to be a mutant. So she's still on honorable mention because I've only seen her used a couple times in war, but just with the way the map is set up right now, because she also has a slow to counter unstoppable armor, with the way the map is set up right now, I expect there's quite a bit she can do, and I do expect her stock to rise. So I'm going to go ahead and call it there. There's a lot to talk about. I feel like the war meta is really in an exciting place right now. I've just been having a ton of fun planning, playing, talking about it recently. There are other things that we're concerned about, we all know that. But I really feel like war is in a good place from a meta perspective, and I'm hoping that the upcoming tactics keep that moving. If you feel like I have dramatically missed the mark with anyone, please let me know in the comments. Happy to talk about it. Like I said, I've loved talking about war recently, even more than normal for me. And yeah, let me know if I've left anybody off this. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and take care.